Economists are in agreement. Trump's tariffs are going to cause the prices we pay for things to go up. But just how much are we actually going to end up paying? Let's take a look at that. Today, the US imports just over $3 trillion worth of goods annually, and these goods make up roughly a quarter of the goods that we purchase. The average tariff on those imports is 2.5%, but that's just an average. A lot of the goods imported into the US, like Canadian oil, aren't subject to any tariffs, while others, like Chinese electric vehicles, are subject to very high tariffs. After Trump officially becomes president, both the number of goods subject to tariffs and the tariffs themselves will almost certainly go up. We don't know, though, by exactly how much. On the campaign trail, Trump threw out a bunch of different tariff proposals. Everything from 10% to 20% across the board tariffs to tariffs of hundreds of percent on certain countries and industries. The Budget Lab at Yale put together one of the most comprehensive reports on this topic that I've seen. They looked at 12 different tariff scenarios and modeled what their impact could be on costs for American households, on inflation, and on GDP. The most benign scenario they looked at is one in which there's a 10% universal tariff on most imported goods, with the exception of goods imported from China, which are tariffed at 60%, and imports from the 20 countries which the US has free trade agreements with, which, under this scenario, could continue to enter the country largely tariff-free. On the other hand, the most draconian scenario they looked at is one in which there's a 20% universal tariff, a 60% tariff on China, a 200% tariff on Mexico, and no exemptions for any free trade agreement countries. So based on these scenarios, here's what they found. They found that for every 1% increase in the average tariff rate, consumer prices increase by about 0.1%. In the lowest tariff scenario, that means that consumer prices would increase by 1.2%, while in the highest tariff scenario, they would increase by 5.1%. That translates into a cost for the average US household of $1,900 to $7,600. Those numbers are pretty big, especially that $7,600 number. That's pretty significant. But those numbers might overstate what we actually see from Trump's tariffs. As the Budget Lab points out, if the prices of imported goods go up, consumers will tend to buy fewer imported goods and substitute them for goods produced in the US. Or in cases where there are no domestically produced alternatives, they'll probably favor imports from countries with lower tariffs over imports from countries with higher tariffs. Assuming we see this type of substitution, the rise in consumer prices could be anywhere from 0.5% to 2%, which is less than half the increase we'd see without substitution. To put that in perspective, inflation was 5.9% in 2021 and 2022, 2.8% in 2023, and is on track to be just over 2.5% this year. So based on the modeling done by Yale's Budget Lab, the tariffs probably aren't going to lead to the type of inflation we saw a couple years ago where prices were just skyrocketing. But the impact could potentially still be noticeable, especially if we see those really draconian tariffs. After all, 2% inflation is what the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, targets. If you add a 0.5 percentage point to that, it probably won't register all that much. But if you add another 2% on top of that, you're gonna feel it. 2% might not sound like much, but it's notable, especially when you consider that the price increases will disproportionately impact certain categories of goods. Goods that are predominantly imported, like apparel, toys, and footwear, could see their prices rise dramatically. The National Retail Federation estimates that prices for those goods could jump anywhere from 6% to 56% because of Trump's tariffs. So there's definitely the potential for significant price increases. Ultimately, a lot of this depends on what types of tariffs Trump actually ends up implementing. Trump, as we all know, has a habit of changing his mind often. And we could get everything from lower than expected tariffs to higher than expected tariffs and everything in between. The only thing we know for sure is that tariffs are gonna go up. The Budget Lab projects that the average US tariff rate will go up from 2.5% currently to anywhere from 9% to 30% under the various scenarios that they analyzed. But that also means that there is a wide range of possibilities. It's also important to remember that the impact of tariffs isn't just going to be limited to the prices we pay for things. They reduce consumer choice, they hurt the many industries that rely on imported goods, and they often lead to retaliation from other countries, which hurts US exporters. The Budget Lab projects that in the highest tariff scenario, US GDP would be reduced by 1.4% over the medium term. The US economy has grown at an average annual rate of just under 2.5% over the past decade. So this would be the equivalent of erasing just over half a year's of economic growth. Anyway, I've talked a lot about the downsides of Trump tariffs, but there is a more rosy interpretation of them as well. The hope from Trump and others who support tariffs is that they eventually lead to stronger domestic industries, more jobs, and a reduction in trade imbalances. If you want to learn more about the big debate surrounding tariffs and what it means for the US economy, check out this video I recently recorded. That's it for now. I hope this was useful. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.